Hello, everyone. Welcome to our very first case studies of a living legend, a guide for CC players to the LL format. I am here today with, you could say, the patriarch of our local community, Pat Eshghy, a resident guardian, honor roll member on both Oldhim and Bravo star of the show, a TCG no, not the Runaways. TCG Runaways, or is it just Runaways?
As a Fabled Runaways, yeah.
Fabled Runaways. I'm so sorry. I've edited in post. I got it correct.
I believe you.
Yeah, that's staying in. They know I'm not editing that part out. But a Fabled Runaways member, Pat, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Feeling just recovering a little bit from a cold, but other than that, doing great. Got to play Constructed last night for the first time in like a week and a half. Got to shake some of the rust off. I really can't wait for Rosetta to come out. So hope
Yeah,
to see
I
everybody.
saw you playing Zen last night. Are you feeling a little stale on the meta with Zen, or are you
It
still
was kind of
enjoying it?
the deck that was built at the time. I played Bravo at the PT. Obviously, I didn't do very well at the PT, but the Zen list that I played was the exact Zen list that Charles Dunn won the calling with at Amsterdam.
Mhm.
And the deck's great. It could struggle to beat news sometimes, but it if you avoid the news, it's real easy. So
Yeah, that's that's been my experience with it. Except I don't avoid the news; I get all of them. But I see, and I'm sure our eagle-eyed viewers will notice in the background we have a Oldhim store banner, um, and I'm going to use that to segue into another Elemental Guardian. We're here today to talk about Bravo, star of the show, and to get players up to speed with this hero. Many of them will be familiar with Bravo, but can you talk a little bit about what's different about Bravo Star of the Show from the Welcome to Wraith Hero Bravo Showstop?
yeah, so Bravo Star of the Show is a Elemental Guardian, similar to Oldhim, but he's allowed to play, in addition to Earth and Ice, he can also play Lightning cards. And his hero ability requires you basically kind of, hardly signals you to playing all three elements, because if you can reveal one of each element at the beginning of your turn, your next attack will get +2 attack, dominate, and go again, which as long as the attack costs 3 or greater. So you get some really powerful synergies from kind of revealing kind of what uh, Pheno Black will call the crayons on the the colors of the rainbow. You reveal these 3 cards, and you get to kind of do some really powerful things by giving go again to cards like Okanold, and then you get to use the power of Winter's Wail that was so powerful that it got taken away from Oldhim as well. To use that go again and make another disruptive attack after the first dominate attack that would kind of mess and deal damage to your opponent.
And I'll lead the witness here a little. Starvo's kind of known as a boogeyman among a lot of flesh and blood players. I think more than any other hero in the game, Starvo elicits a certain hesitation, a certain dread that maybe some players have about the LL format. Can you talk a little bit about why that is in context of Starvo's legacy within Classic Constructed?
Yeah, so I mean the meme that Ethan always would put on is, "We don't talk about Starvo,"
Yeah.
the Encanto meme. But to me, that was kind of like, I started playing in Tales of Aria, like right as Tales of Aria dropped. So like when I had already kind of liked Oldhim a little bit, but I'd played a lot of Briar, and then Starvo came out. I was just like immediately drawn to him. And I quickly, kind of identified how powerful he was. I think there was a lot of hesitation at first, but the tournaments kept rolling along, and people were like, okay, this hero is just dominating. It went extremely, like from kind of is this deck good to okay, this is the best deck in the format. And at PT1, um, I did really well with Starvo. And due to some unseen circumstances, didn't make my way into top eight, but played my heart out and did really well that tournament. Um, but we kind of got to see Starvo kind of emerge from that event at PT1 as kind of the best. Like, it didn't win; it ended up losing to Chain in the finals. Pablo Pintor got the W in that tournament, but it was clear just based on the pure numbers that the deck was just very powerful. It's kind of an impressive deck to face too, because it has these fused Oakenolds, with Go Again, having 11 dominate, make your opponent randomly discard or randomly put 2 cards on the bottom of their deck, which kind of doesn't really allow your opponent to play. So I think it gets kind of a bad rap is that, that when it's doing its thing, your opponent kind of doesn't really get to play the game. But
Mm-hmm.
on the counterpoint, like the things that people kind of don't realize are the hands that don't work. And you have, I will attack for 7 or 5, like in these hands where, are the hands when Starvo kind of fails.
Mm-hmm.
But, if you have ever been on the wrong side of Starvo, I, empathize with you because it is certainly not a great experience to, especially if you're learning Flesh and Blood and new to the game. So I think that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that kind of um, puts people off about it in some sense. And then we saw for Living Legend, whenever it came back, um, and we had the very first ever Living Legend tournament at World Championships in Lille. It was 8 Starvos in top 8, including
Yeah.
two of my teammates, Charles Dunn and Lucas Oswald, facing in the finals. And they, would basically, a card for card mirror. Lucas had a few different cards because he wasn't able to get some of the cards, but other than that, those two, dominated, and then we see, all the bands and whatnot. So I think that's kind of
Yeah,
what
and I
Starvo.
think notably, Pro Tour, the was it the Battle Hardened or the Calling that followed the Pro Tour that had a Living Legend tournament where Starvo, I don't believe, appeared in the top
That
eight.
was so yeah, that was at Pro Tour LA, and there was
Mm-hmm.
a battle. This was after the bans, and we saw them, well, I say bans, but restrictions. We saw them restrict Oakenol, we saw them restrict Crippling Crush, and we saw them restrict Starstruck. Um, and Channel Lake Frigid and Hypothermia, all of like premium cards for Starvo. And it's like, they really were just like, okay, we can't have a repeat of what happened in Lille again, the Oops All Starvo.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe they went a little overboard. I think if it were me, I would probably allow Starstruck or Crippling
Mm-hmm.
Crush, one or the other, to be back in, and Okanold I think making sense at one, but I think they kind of hit it a little too hard. But that's just me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but and then we saw that they unrestricted Channel Lake Frigid because they were like, well, we see decks like Zen with stubby hammers,
Yes.
being able to make their appearance, and maybe we need to have some more control to the field. So I'm super excited
Mm-hmm.
to see what the Living Legend format goes about now, and like how they'll at the Living Legend tournament, the Battle Hardened in Amsterdam, there was 8 different heroes in top 8, which is just
Mm-hmm.
awesome. Like, we just can't
I
ask for
loved
better.
that. I mean, it was so relieving. I think for people who are playing in the CC meta, it you couldn't get a better vote of confidence for the Chicago Calling than to see a Pro Tour top 8, all different heroes. To combat the narrative of this is a one hero format. That obviously it started out that way. Do you think it's fair to say that Bravo, star of the show, has been on the operating table this whole time for LSS? Because we do see things like hypothermia, or I'm sorry, Channel Lake Frigid coming back into the deck. Do you think this is still LSS's number one uh, operating patient?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's some hesitancy to kind of let Starvo be the best deck just because of, like I said before, that it's not fun to face Starvo when he's doing his Starvo things. Some like to
And
some
why
extent.
is that?
Well, because you have these turns where you just don't get to play. Like you like
Yes.
whenever Starvo goes, reveal to Starvo ability and then Okanold into Winter's Wail. Like you best case
Hmm.
scenario, you're going to take 6 damage and do nothing on your turn. Like that. Like that's best case scenario.
Hmm.
Like against a normal deck. Like, but what you don't want is what happened like whenever we were in the actual true Starvo meta was like every deck playing unmovable because you're like, okay, every deck has to play 3 unmovables if you're going to try to base Starvo. Like, if your
Yeah.
deck has any amount of blues in it, you're just going to have to start playing unmovables so that you have a chance, like just so you can
Hmm.
try to play, right? And that I'm pretty sure that LSS doesn't want that to be the case.
Hmm.
So with that being said, I do think that LSS is probably a bit cautious to let Starvo be the best deck. But I still think that Starvo is perfectly viable in this meta as it is. And even with them bringing back Channel Lake Frigid, I think it clearly shows that LSS is willing to take the shackles off a little bit, and we'll see what they
Hmm.
do in the future. But I think the deck still performs admirably.
Speaking of shackles, you mentioned the final match between Chain
Yeah.
and Starvo. Do you think that is at all historically a period of flesh and blood that might be comparable to what we see now with Zen and New, or was it a situation where Starvo was overwhelmingly favored? How does it compare to the modern landscape of Classic Constructed?
Yeah, no,
Is it a similar narrative?
that's a great question. So I will say that I do not think that it is similar to Zen versus New. Zen versus New is a lot more like one deck is the aggro deck and one deck is the control deck fighting on these axes. Whereas in the Starvo versus Chain matchup, it really depended how you built your deck. So at
Mm-hmm.
PT1, the team that I was on at the time, Eye of the Storm, we had a transformational sideboard to try to fatigue Zens, or excuse me, fatigue Chains.
Yeah.
And we were playing Biting Gale and Ram's Head, and playing super defensively. We boarded out all of our non-blocks, except we'd keep like one Blizzard in, and we would board out almost all of our non-attacks so they couldn't deal damage to us with um, invert existence. So
Mm-hmm.
that we'd be very cautious about what type of non-attack went to our graveyard. And that matchup was probably one of the reasons I did very well at PT1 is because against a lot of chains, I was able to fatigue them.
Mm-hmm.
But you like Starvo was certainly capable of racing chain as well. Like and that was kind of the guessing games that chains had to start doing towards the like kind of the end of that cycle, like after the PT when kind of Starro was not living legend yet. Like the chain player would kind of be like, well, if I know they're trying to race me, I have to play Husk, right? But if I know they're
Mm-hmm.
trying to fatigue me, Husk is just a liability. It's not going to do me
Yes.
anything, right? So like you would kind of have these like um, guessing games. I know facing Kevin Brayer at one of the pro quests we went to, and he was an avid chain player. I would like roll a die before the game started, and he was like, "Is this to determine what you're doing in this game?" Because you can keep your deck in any configuration that you wanted. Like they don't
Yeah.
know if they're going to try to fatigue or not, and it was just a
Well,
mind game. But it was just one of those things that they're having to guess and to try to figure out what approach they have to take to the matchup.
and that's interesting because I did not play while Starvo was in Classic Constructed, and I think that when you hear these horror stories, these war stories of how oppressive Starvo was, it's hard to imagine that there are a wide range of archetypes that people are playing in this deck or that they're approaching it different ways. I think it becomes very monolithic in that, like, oh, the Starvo deck. Starvo was the deck, and there was only one, and they all ran the same 80 cards. So I'm interested. you say that there's sort of a fatigue archetype that you can play. You can play this aggressive archetype. It's a disruptive deck. Are there any other archetypes or terms that you might think of that would help players who haven't played this deck get an immediate understanding of what they're sitting across from?
I think that the other archetype that you can talk about too is like awakening the versus non-awakening decks. So like
Mhm.
awakening is now restricted and quite frankly deserves to be restricted because that card was
It's a
really ridiculous.
it's a card that every time I read, I'm just like, what?
well,
Like
so
this is a
so
real card?
So Awakening was printed before Pulverize existed. So let's just say that
Okay.
Awakening was when Awakening came out. There were and like only Oldhim could play Awakening. It was a fair card. But then whenever you
Mhm.
put Awakening into Starvo's hands and he can play
Yeah.
Crippling Crushes and Pulverizes when those cards came out, then the card became a little unfair because
Yeah.
at the time when Awakening came out, the best you could play was a Righteous Cleansing.
Okay.
But the point I was trying to make about Awakening is we saw Michael Hamilton play a Zero Awakening version of Starvo and
Mhm.
win calling Indianapolis with it. And everybody was shocked. He's like, oh, he didn't play any Awakenings. Awakening doesn't have to get banned because, everybody was,
Yeah.
just marveling at the fact that he didn't play Awakening. And his logic was that he didn't want to mess up his pitch stack by shuffling his deck by casting the card. And he was building this kind of pitch stack Starvo, where first cycle he would play defense, and then he would set up the pitch stack so that he'd be drawing into his Starvo activations every turn, every turn, every turn,
Mhm.
and kind of dominating that late game once he got back to second cycle. So
Mm.
that's just kind of one more archetype that can kind of exist inside of Starvo.
Mhm.
But I think even Michael Hamilton would probably put one copy of Awakening into his Starvo deck if he was playing Living Legend. I'd like to think. But
Yeah. As far as tech against this hero, is there any good generic sideboard advice if a player knows that their local meta is made up of Starvo heroes? We know Unmovable was one that you mentioned. Um, is there any sort of it doesn't have to be a generic card, but is there a general sense of what 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 you should attempt with your sideboarding?
yeah, so Unmovable is a big one. I think that if you're really seeing like you're probably going to face a lot of Starvos, putting two copies of Unmovable in your deck is probably a nice hedge for Starvo. Um, Other D reacts, like just having sync belows just to cover the winner's whale, and kind of like not being afraid to just like play that sync below on the winner's whale, and get that annoying pesky frostbite off of your back, would
Yes.
be just huge. Like and it's like I know that Lucas, whenever he played at the Battle Hardened versus Charles, he was unable to come up with staunch responses. That was the card that he was missing, so he just played Sync Belows in their place. And he
Mhm.
claims that Sync Below is better than staunch response. So I mean, like even just having that in that spot can be
Mhm.
super helpful because the Winter's Whale specifically is one of the cards that really trouble like makes the trouble on the turns where you don't fuse when you don't have the Starvo fuse and you're just
Right.
blocking and you're sending back that one card of very like efficient disruptive attack. Um, that's the type of card that can kind of one card get you out of jail and give you that pivot turn that you need to pressure the Starvo into like taking a bunch
Yeah.
of damage to try to hold his fuse hand that he draws on the next turn.
And players who have just entered the game won't really have much experience with elemental heroes because they all have hit living legend. We are seeing some come out within a month from now. However, it seems to me that if we were to say that Starvo is one element, if he was a one element hero, is it correct to say that he's ice?
I think Ice is probably what he is. I mean, it kind of anybody. Winter's Whale was the best card in that deck, like by far.
Yeah.
And whenever we would build our like element counts, usually it would be like Earth at like 16 to 17, Ice at 16 to 17, and like lightning at like 12 or something like that. Usually is what our
Mhm.
numbers were. But at PT1, like we wanted to play cards like Biting Gale, so we even like inverted our list a little bit crazier. So we were at like 16 Earth, 18 Ice, and like 12 Lightning. Um, just because we wanted to play those, really annoying, you know, cards like Blizzard and Channel Lake and all those just like really disruptive ice cards,
Mhm.
and be able to swing Winter's Whale every turn with whenever it was presented to.
Yeah. Um, if you were to like paint a picture of a player who might want to play Starvo, or I guess I'll ask it this way: what type of player in Classic Constructed should look at playing Starvo when approaching Living Legend?
That's a good question. So if you like playing the best deck in the format, I think that you will enjoy Starvo. Not saying that Starvo is the best deck in the format, but he like operates on like that capacity. Whenever Starvo is operating well, uh, he's untouched. Like
Mhm.
you can't compete with the turns that he has. Like when he's operating well. But there also is a bit of randomness. So maybe if you're a brute player and don't feel like rolling up some berserk decks, if you want to,
Yeah.
kind of have some, randomness, I do think Berserk Reinhardt is a legit threat as well. But if you are brute player and you feel like rolling some dice a little bit, Starvo has a little bit of that access on as well.
Yeah, and I don't think he's got a Savage Sash. He may have a Tunic. Is this a Tunic deck?
Yeah, there were some old lists that did play tectonic plating in Starvo back in
Mhm.
the day, but I think now with uh, the since they took away your three crippling crushes and your three starstrucks, you don't have that much need to have that extra seismic surge.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of times they were just playing the tectonic plating just for the extra armor into the
Sure.
Starvo mirror. Um, but Tunic is just so powerful in combinations with Crown of Seeds that you
Mhm.
kind of have to play Tunic. I think just being able to like make that 5 card hand, um, and it's like a true 5 card hand, not an Arsenal 5 card hand. You're preventing 1 damage and then giving yourself the out to get another chance to Starvo fuse is just so powerful. So I think you'll
Um,
see Tunic in almost
and
every game.
so as far as an equipment suite, we might think of like Crown of Seeds, Tunic, probably Civic Steps, and then I'm thinking the Iron Gauntlets,
Yeah,
the
Gauntlets of
Stonewall
Iron Will,
Gauntlets,
Gauntlets of Iron Will, or the Stone Fist
Gauntlets of Iron
Gauntlets.
Will.
Yeah, yeah.
That yeah.
In the list that I would have played at uh, the PT, it had both Gauntlets of Iron Will and Stone Fist Gauntlet for Zen.
Hmm.
Um, and obviously Stalagmite is the one of the unsung heroes in that deck. That is actually great against Zen because it's great whenever Zen uses his stubby hammerers to try to go off. You can block with the Stalagmite and the Stonefist Gauntlet, which kind of
Mm.
forces them to break the chain so that they can uh, get rid of the debuff on the Stonefist Gauntlet. But then that breaking the chain gives you another block with the
Uh,
Stalagmite to give them 2 Frostbites in the same turn, and
yeah.
hopefully that's enough to disrupt them from kind of going completely crazy. So,
Yeah. It's nice to hear that Zen has some counters for those turns.
oh yeah, and then just a
Even
timely blizzard can also just mess their whole
yeah.
thing up as well. So
Oh,
yeah,
that would hurt. Um, I would love to see a Zen put their equipment in front of me
mhm.
on a turn where I just have a Blizzard sitting in Arsenal. Just yeah,
Yeah, go
go
nuts.
ahead.
Yeah,
Um,
a blizzard and
but
2 Frostbites. Good luck getting through this. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
uh, pitch 2 cards to swing Kakura and end turn.
Yeah.
Um, so obviously, there has been an attempt to curve the power level from when Starvo was in their heyday. If there are any 90-10 matchups for Starvo against Starvo's favor, uh, are there any? If there are any, are there any?
So some people will say that Prism, the like original Prism, is very good against
Mhm,
Starvo. I disagree. Um,
mhm,
I always did very well playing against Prism back in the day, but that being said, that was full power Starvo versus Nerf Starvo. So
mhm.
I can't say that I've played the format enough to know how well it is, but being Prism being able to put in a bunch of auras is pretty bad for you. Um, you'll likely get into a spot where you like if you can't fuse like on multiple turns in a row, you'll start to fall behind.
Mm,
So like Prism can be pretty tough. Um, but like that's the nice thing about Starvo is that you're kind of like live into everybody just because of like if you just do the Starvo thing, you're just going to be able to beat pretty much anything.
sure.
But like the deck that punishes you the most for missing is definitely Prism.
Yeah. Um, as far as well, I think that's also just sort of the Guardian's cross to bear
Sure.
is
Yeah.
clearing auras, spending a whole turn to swing.
Mhm.
A Titan's fist into an aura is a pretty brutal
You
matchup.
don't feel very good doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I wonder if there is a hero that is most comparable in Classic Constructed right now. Is it Azalea or is it more of a Guardian? Because I tend to lean towards Azalea in my assessment, mainly because of both dominate and on hits. Obviously, Bravo is still in the game, but I feel that some of the on hits from Azalea are a little bit more impactful. Where do
No,
you lie on that? Do you?
that's a good analogy. I've never heard anybody compare Starvo to Azalea, but that's probably a very like reasonable analogy. Like when Azalea does her thing, it feels kind of similar to Starvo. Is like okay, they dominated an arrow for like 19. Okay, what am I
Yeah,
gonna do?
there's another.
Very
There's
similar.
the red on the ledger again. It's
Yeah.
back.
Mhm.
They've played six of them this game.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
Red in the Ledger is even worse than Spinal Crush. Spinal Crush you
yeah,
got to take four. Red in the Ledger you got to take one. And then
yeah,
you're done. So yeah, that's probably a pretty good analogy. Uh, yeah, I like that. I like that call.
yeah. And we talked a little bit about how things can get awkward for Starvo. Does that tend to be revolving around the uh the revealing of the elemental cards from hand? Is that more around pitching? Like if Starvo's hero ability isn't online, are they struggling, or is it just more of if you have all reds in your hand, you're blocking?
Well, I mean, kind of every deck kind of has that, right? Like no deck wants to draw four reds. Like I mean, maybe Fi can draw four reds because
Yeah.
his deck is kind of a little built to do that. But
Can I introduce you
yeah,
to Emperor?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like the true Starvo players like that get really well with Starvo were the ones like that could figure out something to do with the hands that didn't fuse. Like it's easy
Mhm.
to play Starvo when you're fusing every turn, and
Yeah.
it's just like okay, this plus hammer, right? And it's like
Mhm.
pitch my lightning card to play my attack, and then swing with hammer with my ice card, right? Like those lines are pretty simple. It's the turns where you're trying to be like, okay, this hand I drew, two autumn's touches and a lightning surge, and and like these are the hands that you're trying to be like, okay, how can I
Yeah.
maneuver out of this turn, and it is blocking. And Starvo, like he doesn't block the best because a lot of his cards block
Fair
for
amount of
two
two blocks.
because yeah,
Yeah.
but so he's kind of like a little opposite of like what a traditional guardian would be. Um
Mhm.
and he, does have to kind of fall back on the winner's whale a lot of the time. But if you just get Starvo to come in a warm four, that's like the best thing you could ever hear from Starvo. Warm four, you're like, send me the bill, I'll take it, and then kind of
Yeah.
come at them and just hope to give them the business.
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to tell players about Starvo specifically as they approach the Living Legend format? And I'll on behalf of them say that they have an impression that Starvo is the boogeyman.
I would say that to give it a chance, for one,
Mhm.
like I know that it is certainly, has a reputation about him that he can potentially, do some things. And if you're teaching some, newer players, I probably wouldn't start with Starvo because of
Terra.
but presumably, if you're going into this living legend format, we got the skirmish season coming up. Presumably this might be some people's first forays into the living legend
Mhm.
format, and you're going to do some testing. You're going to want to play against some Starvos, and you
Mhm.
know give it a chance. And the first time you draw the hand and you get to show your opponent what you're about to do to them as it happens, you will feel a euphoric feeling as it comes across your hand, and you just kind of get to push the Starvo hero up and kind of do a little slight giggle to yourself as you about to beat your opponent over the head. So I really
Yeah,
enjoy playing Starvo.
I believe that's called power tripping.
Yes.
But yeah, I think everyone can relate to both enjoying that and being on the other side of
Oh
that, and just kind of, I really liked this hand.
yeah.
Just like I really wanted to have this
I wanted to
turn.
attack with this hand, but I guess not this time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Pat. I think that's all the questions I have. Where can people find you if they want to hear more about your journey as you continue on your flesh and blood career?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Eshghy.
Mhm.
If you want to, hopefully I'll put it in because nobody can spell it, but I'll put it in. I'll have you put it in the bottom.
Yeah, this one I actually will edit in. I won't edit out my mistakes from earlier, but this one I will have in. Yeah.
But awesome.
All right. Well, good luck to you with all your games in the future and to the Fabled Runaways. I look forward to seeing you and some of your teammates, hopefully at Camp Greentree. I don't know that we have any Living Legend on the schedule there,
Not that I'm
but
aware of. No.
yeah, well, I wouldn't be opposed if we saw some Starvo come out that weekend. Not for the tournament itself. That would be uh, they might have to tell you to play,
A different.
that bad hero Zen. Um, but yeah, thanks again so much for coming on, and
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate this. I think this was really informative, and I hope everybody took something out of it.
yeah, I do as well. Hopefully, people are getting excited for their chance to see some history of Flesh and Blood, some heroes in the archives. So, um, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Craig.